When you all were 16 years old, what were some of the things that you guys were doing? What were your lives like? I mean, just shouting about rock climbing,
High school.
high school, swimming. Nice. Well, when my grandparents were the same age, they were very similar to a lot of you in that they were involved in activities, working jobs, just living life the way that it's supposed to be lived when you're 16 years old. However, all of that changed on February 19th, 1942, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, utterly disrupting the lives of nearly 120,000 Japanese Americans all across the West Coast. Today, I'll be talking about the Japanese American incarceration experience, something that, although it occurred decades ago, still holds plenty of significance today. As unjust as the treatment was of Japanese Americans back in the 1940s, it's absolutely terrifying to see the same discrimination and ostracism occurring today at the expense of the Muslim community. History tends to repeat itself, and without learning from the experiences of Japanese Americans, we will continue to dehumanize Muslims in the same way that we did to Japanese Americans back in the 1940s. So before I get into my content, I'd like to make a clarification on a term that I'll be using that you might not be used to hearing within this context. Oftentimes, history classes will refer to the Japanese American experience as internment, but this term isn't exactly accurate because internment refers to the detention of enemy aliens during a time of war. When in fact, most Japanese Americans, 2/3 to be precise, were actually U.S. citizens at the time of their detainment. Internment also refers, or is a euphemism, to kind of soften what happens during time, so instead of using that term, I'll be using the term incarceration instead. So first, I wanted to start by just talking about how Japanese Americans got to be incarcerated in the first place. On December 7, 1941, Japanese forces bombed Pearl Harbor, leading the United States to enter World War II. The widespread hysteria and paranoia that ensued led to the complete ostracization of Japanese Americans all across the West Coast. And as an article on the National Park Service website states, Lieutenant General John DeWitt believed that if the United States could control all civilian activity within the West Coast, they could prevent another Pearl Harbor-like attack from happening, which resulted in the way that they treated Japanese Americans at this time. There's a quote in which DeWitt claims that a Jap's a Jap. They're a dangerous element, whether loyal or not. And this was really reflective of the racist views that were common during this time. People believed that the military necessity of evacuation justified the broad-scale removal of an entire people group, despite the moral dilemma that it posed. On the flip side, in a 2017 article that was published in the Fresno View by Mark Benjamin, he portrays the Japanese American point of view through Saburo Masada. Masada has this quote in which he says that most of Japanese Americans didn't even know who the emperor was. They didn't question Germans about Hitler, they didn't question Italians about dictator Benito Mussolini. Our only crime was our face. And this was in fact true. Out of the 120,000 Japanese Americans that were incarcerated, there wasn't a single person that was convicted of committing a crime of sedition or espionage during the time of war. And yet, that didn't stop the nation from carrying out the mass removal of all Japanese Americans throughout the West Coast, effectively ruining their lives in every imaginable way. So secondly, I'd like to just talk about some personal stories that reflect just how life was during these incarceration camps. In an article published in the San Jose Mercury News by Matt O'Brien, he talks about the story of Matt Iwagaki, one that really resonated with me. Iwagaki was a well-known dual sport athlete and a student government leader during his high school years, and so he really had a lot of the same things going for him that I had going for me during high school. However, with the carrying out of Executive Order 9066, all of that changed, and he fell into the shadows of his high school and really became a stranger to both teachers and students alike. While some Japanese Americans during this time garnered the support of their peers amidst their exclusion, Iwagaki's experiences were really representative of how most Japanese Americans were treated. Just the common themes of alienation and discrimination after the Executive Order. There's also the story of Toshiko Kadawaki, who was incarcerated in the Poston, Arizona incarceration camp. In a book that was written in 2014 by Precious Yamaguchi, she talks about how, in an interview with Kadawaki, she revealed that she lost a child as she was giving birth because of the poor medical conditions at the camp. If this isn't indicative of how poor the standard of living was, the living conditions were. From paper-thin walls within their barracks, to cramped living spaces, to cafeterias slop for food, to just an utter lack of privacy, the standard of living made life so abysmal for Japanese Americans during this time. Here are a few pictures that just show what life was like inside those camps. So the top left picture is actually a picture that I took over the summer at Manzanar, which was an incarceration camp in California. And it kind of shows what a barrack looked like, or the inside of a barrack looked like. And then the other pictures just show what life was like from inside the camp. Many families lost loved ones because of the poor standards of living, but the psychological effects that the camps had were equally as devastating. In a book written in 2003 by Tetsuren Kashima, he talks about how psychological damage was common for Japanese Americans after the camps because of the awful things that they had to endure. From having to sell nearly all their belongings, to leaving their past lives behind, to being outcasted in their very own country, and then having to live in these inhumane incarceration camps, life was simply a nightmare for Japanese Americans during World War II. Similarly, the rise of Islamophobia has made life increasingly hard for Muslims in the United States as well. Terrorist attacks tend to paint people's perceptions of Muslims, which results in their discrimination. But that discrimination became a lot more real in 2017 when President Donald Trump imposed a travel ban. In an article in the Chicago Reporter that was published earlier this week, Vahid Niayesh talks about how the number of immigrant visas that have been issued to Muslim-majority countries has been free-falling since the travel ban, which really points to the travel ban in essence being a Muslim ban. Going back to Salvador Masada's quote, "Our only crime was our face." And this really holds true here. By now, you would think that we should understand that the actions of a few individuals do not define an entire people group as a whole, and yet here we are with history repeating itself before our very eyes as we wrongfully villainize the Muslims in our current daily lives. So to wrap things up, I understand that everyone is entitled to their own views on Japanese American incarceration. However, my hope for this speech was to prove that it's so much more than something that we just learn in our history classes. The dehumanization of people has found its way back to society, whether we like it or not. It's up to you all to decide how people should be treated, but I hope that with this new information, you're able to make an educated decision in the best interest of all parties involved.